My name is Paviour, and I'm here to talk about achieving emotional engagement at work. How do I come to be here talking about this? I'll tell you a little bit about my background. First of all, I'm not an academic. As Nita says, I'm running a business. I work with a lot of corporate organisations. And I studied psychology and biology, and I really believe that communication is the foundation of all happiness in life and success in business and life too. So that's where I'm coming from. I like the positive psychology way of thinking about life. And in 1998 I won an EU award for my work in stress management. And then I started noticing that there might be a bit of a connection between relationships and stress. I'm not exactly going out on a limb here, am I? No, we maybe have all noticed that, so it wasn't exactly a massive observation. But it did lead to me writing a book called Changing Vampires into Angels, which I'm not going to talk about, but it started the process of me thinking about emotional engagement, as you'll probably see as I go along. So that's a bit about my background, but actually I want to tell you a little bit more about my background before I go on any further. I want to go back even further than when I did my degree, which I believe me is far enough. But actually, when I was 7 years old, I was in a gang called the Treehouse Gap. And there were 3 of us. There was myself and the 2 boys who lived next door, Adrian and Nicholas. And one day, we used to get up to all sorts of different adventures, and one day Adrian and I decided that the thing that we were going to do was we were going to have this demon rising myth that we were going to generate. And we thought the best way to generate it was with poor Nicholas, who was a year younger than us both. So what we did, we said to Nicholas, now look Nicholas, today is the day that if you're really lucky, you will see the demons rising on the other side of the cornfield. But first of all, you have to go and sit in the dark for half an hour. So we kept Nicholas in the dark, and after a little while, we rushed to the other side of the cornfield, Adrian and I, both 7 years old, painted our faces red, got on the sort of attire that a 7-year-old thinks that a demon would wear, naturally plenty of red. You notice? Certain things in life don't change. And once we got there, we told him at the appointed time, there he was, Nicholas, on the other side of the cornfield. And so we jumped up and we danced demonically, as we believed. I mean, I don't know how demons dance, I have to say, but we thought it would be something like this. Ooh. And then we dipped down behind the corn and crawled off into the woodland to desperately start taking the paint off our faces, while Nicholas is on the other side of the cornfield saying, Adrian, Maria, wait for me. And at that point, I grew suspicious that he knew more than we thought. That maybe he was maybe a little bit suspicious about these demons. But I don't know. But the point is really that it's really easy as kids to be emotionally engaged in just about anything, isn't it? And I'm sure you've all got a story a bit like that. I mean, I'm not, leaving out the demons bit and the dancing. Well, no, maybe. But everybody has got a story back in their childhood of when they were able to get really emotionally engaged in something. And it's interesting that all of us were, including Nicholas. He became so emotionally engaged, he joined in with it. But I'm going to just talk a little bit about what we mean by emotionally engaged, because there are 2 types of engagement. One of them, the CIPD have identified this, is called transactional engagement. I used to think of this as engagement. Transactional engagement is really interesting. This is where you are really engaged in the job, but it's a bit like being a tightrope walker, because it can be highly stressful and it can be quite dangerous. When you're transactionally engaged, you do get things done. It's about efficiency. On the other hand, transactionally engaged people can sometimes pull a sickie and may leave the company. They love what they do. I work a lot with lawyers in very big law firms, and I see transactionally engaged in lawyers, and I see emotionally engaged lawyers. And there's a big difference between the two. So emotional engagement, what is that? Well, this here is Frank Lampard, and before anybody asks, he's not wiping his nose, he's actually kissing his badge, his club badge. This is all about being engaged with the organisation. This is about loving the organisation you work for. And emotional engagement has been shown to be the antithesis to stress. So whereas transactional engagement can be quite stressful, emotional engagement actually can be the solution to stress. What's different about emotional engagement? If you want to retain people, they need to be emotionally engaged, because emotionally engaged people say, I love my company, I love my organisation, I love who I work for. That's where they're engaged. Emotionally engaged people make a profit, they're effective. It's not so much about processing, it's about, I want to make a difference here, because I believe in this. So, how emotionally engaged are you? So a really quick pop quiz, because I just want you to think. Anybody here actually get involved in engagement surveys at all? Has anyone got an engagement survey? There's one person very quietly raised their hand. Yeah, a few people, so a few people already are carrying out engagement surveys. Fantastic. I'm going to ask you a few questions to ask yourself about your level of emotional engagement. Do you feel inspired by your work? Do you get so absorbed in your work that time flies and you forget everything around you? Do you know that feeling? Do you want to go to work in the mornings? I mean, do you wake up on a Monday morning and go, yes, work, yay? There's some lovely smiling faces out there. I hope they're smiling for the right reasons. Do you feel a sense of pride in your work? Do you become energetic when you're at work? And do you feel happy when working really intensely? These are some of the pointers of emotional engagement. Now, I was recently having a conversation with a client of mine, and she'd attended a forum on engagement surveys, actually. And she was there with some really big players, big supermarket chains, and they all had the same question. They were saying, why is it we all get hammered on the pay and rewards question? And I don't know if there's anyone here who runs an engagement survey and they may be thinking the same. Why is it that, you know, we pay people pretty well? Why do we get a bad score on pay and rewards? And one of the people at the forum suggested that this was because people actually need to vent. It's not really pay and rewards that's the problem. And they thought, well, maybe we should keep the question in there to give people an opportunity to vent. And I asked myself, what's the point of that? You need to know what is really going on, not have a venting question that actually covers up the problem. And this is one of the dangers. If you're doing an engagement survey, be careful, ensure you're looking at the emotional undercurrents as well. It's what I call the coffee machine scenario. You know, if people complain about the coffee machine, it often means that there's something else that's a problem. It isn't really the coffee machine that is giving me a problem. You know, we're not always upset for the reasons we think we are. So why does this venting happen? Well, if you ask cognitive questions about emotional responses, you may get rationalized answers, because the structures in the brain that register emotions don't have any capacity for language. And when you're doing a survey, saying it doesn't feel right, it just doesn't stack up. It's not good enough for a survey. So we have to rationalize how we're feeling. So when we're doing a survey, we need to be looking at both the cognitive and the emotional responses. That's a challenge for us. So what are the measures of emotional engagement? Well, there are three key things. Vigor. And this is about the physicality. How do people put their bodies into their work? How do they invest their physical energy? There's dedication, which is about the emotions. And there's absorption, which is about cognition. So let's just have a look at all three of these, one at a time. So first of all, vigor. So this really relates to resilience, energy, being mentally strong. And if you want energetic people who really persevere through difficulties, who love applying themselves enthusiastically and wholeheartedly to the work, then they need to have really healthy levels of self-efficacy. And what we mean by that is a belief in your abilities, in your capabilities to achieve a goal or an outcome. It's that belief that I can do it. That's really important. Interestingly, I've done some work just recently with Motorola. It's a big phone company, lots of engineers in it, and we did a little pilot on self-empowerment, because for me, saying self-efficacy is dangerous because I find I get a bit tripped up on it. So I prefer self-empowerment, and actually I like it because it's got a good sound to it, empowerment. And we put together a little program, and that program we thought might well appeal to a lot of women in the organisation. And we had 80% men sign up, so you have to just think, it isn't necessarily something that you can stereotype here. Self-efficacy, the need for self-empowerment is really important, it's vital to emotional engagement, because if you don't believe you can make a difference within yourself, then you cannot become emotionally engaged with your organisation. So it's quite an important factor. The next one, dedication, and this is the desire to invest emotionally in the work. This is about meaning and purpose, inspiration, pride. And what we're talking about really is values, but I don't mean the corporate big boys as, we have values of integrity and we have values of customer service. You know we do because they're on our website. I don't mean that. I mean what really matters here. What really matters to us. I mean, you can see a great example of it if you go back in time a little bit and you remember Anita Roddick, and everybody will know who I mean by Anita Roddick, I'm sure, and the Body Shop, and the values were in everything they did. They just spoke values. And it's because it was all about meaning something to people. It's actually coming back to the people in the teams, working with them, looking at what's their emotional commitment to this. How do they feel about being emotionally engaged with our organisation? Can we align our values with them? They take it very seriously. And this is really, really important, because our beliefs are fundamental to our sense of self, aren't they? What is important to us is fundamental to who we are. Yeah? Do you agree with that? Yeah. And when our values are out of line with our behaviours, then you get this kind of, to use a technical term, it screws you up, basically. I mean, I think that on a lighter note, you can call it cognitive dissonance. But it creates a real problem for people. It creates severe mental disturbance. So if the values and the behaviours that they're putting into their work don't line up, something's going to give. They're either going to go somewhere else where they feel that they can express their values, or something else is going to happen. I mean, there are a lot of problems in organisations where people are finding themselves not feeling like they can really express their values. And this is where things go wrong, where people maybe start doing things that can harm the organisation. And that sounds quite a big deal, harming the organisation. You immediately think of sabotage. Harming the organisation is stuff like being rude to a customer. I mean, that's harming the organisation. Maybe just being a little bit generous to yourself on your expenses. It's that sense of not really caring sufficiently about the organisation. I don't love the organisation enough for it to matter to me. So values are really important, and they need to be values that resonate, something that I can feel a part of. Now, interestingly, I did an interesting piece of work in the NHS on information governance. Now, I'm sure all of you are thrilled to hear about this. Information governance being the sexiest topic that I could possibly come up with today, but actually this is exactly the problem. Total disengagement with the idea of information governance, because it doesn't sound very exciting, does it? But what we did was we started looking at, what is it really all about? Why are we doing these things? What are they doing to benefit our patients? How are they benefiting the people that work here? How are they ensuring that we can continue to run this business, this organisation, even if things go wrong? And what we realised was that when people became really engaged in the purpose, the reason for it, they totally got it. And we even had an auditor who came round and said, can you tell us where the emergency drawer is for when you have emergency downtime? This is when the computers go down and everything could go horribly wrong in terms of patient records. And every member of staff said, it's in that drawer there. You want it's in that drawer? So the auditor went and looked in the drawer and said, there's nothing here. And they said, no, we're using it. And this is the thing, it was constantly being used. The auditor came away and said, this is gold standard. This isn't just policy, this is policy in action. These people are completely committed to this. Yeah, because they get it. So values, so important. And the next thing, which I think is fundamental, particularly to me, and that's that you need to design for happiness. And this is, I can't go into it, I could spend quite a lot of time doing this, it's really interesting. But this is a positive psychologist, his work, Mikolaj Csikszentmihalyi. And he's done some work on a form of happiness. There are basically 3 forms of happiness. This is one of them, and it's called flow. And the idea is, if you can hit that sweet point between skills and challenge, so you need to have enough skills being pushed and used and be challenged sufficiently, you get into something called flow. Now, I don't know if you've ever had this experience. Have you ever had an experience of being so involved in something that you've lost all sense of time and space, and it's just happened, and you've been fantastically creative perhaps? Anybody had that experience? Any little nod? Oh yeah, great, fantastic. My son is a scriptwriter, and he says to me that sometimes he is so immersed in what he's doing, he's working so much at his level of bliss that he actually isn't writing. He's taking dictation from the characters in his film. They're speaking to him. They are telling him the story. They are taking him down whatever path he's going to go. He doesn't know. That is what flow is like. It actually becomes outside yourself. Some people call it a spiritual experience, but it's actually a cognitive process that is going on. If you're going to design for happiness, design for flow, you need to make sure you've got learning of skills, goals, feedback. There needs to be autonomy in there. You have to have some control. And you need to be able to concentrate and be involved. Now there's a great book, I don't know if you've heard of Dan Pink's roundup of the research on motivation. If you haven't, it's a really good book because it just gives you all the research, brings it all together. But what's interesting about it is he talks about what really motivates people, and it's not money. And we know this, research proves it. And hot off the press, I don't know if any of you know this, but HSBC Bank has just said they're increasing their big bonuses. They're increasing them. But they're reducing holiday. So I thought you might be interested to hear that, because what's really interesting is that as long as there's enough money on the table, you need the other factors I've talked about in order to gain real emotional engagement. And I know there was a speaker on before me talking about intrinsic motivation. It's not about money, okay? And it's interesting that bonuses crush creativity, and bonuses reduce performance. And in fact, the bigger the bonus, the worse the performance. I think somebody needs to talk to the banks. Anyhow, if you want to retain talent, which is what these people often say, let's just remind them of what Lennon and McCartney said, which is money can't buy you love, right? So, happiness is actually a business solution. I've been running a course called Happiness as a Business Solution. I'm now calling it Happiness is a Business Solution. And the thing about happiness is, 31% improved performance in people who are happy, so that's got to be a good reason for a start. 37% improved sales in salespeople who are happy. Isn't that interesting? 37%. And interestingly, 18% improved speed and accuracy of diagnosis in doctors who are happy. I was talking to a doctor colleague of mine who said, I'm sorry it's only 18%, like I felt kind of guilty about it. I'm sure it isn't 37. And he said, hey look, that's nearly a fifth better. I mean, come on, that's life-saving stuff. So the thing about happiness is we often push it over the cognitive horizon. You know, I'll be happy when. Anyone ever say that? You know, I'll relax when, it'll be okay when, I'll feel better when. And it's actually a way of travelling. It's about being happy in the now. So it's a really important part for gaining emotional commitment from people, emotional engagement. The other thing is personal empowerment. We need to have that sense of self-efficacy. We need to be able to know that we can make a difference. And also, if you're wanting to do this in your organisation, and I hope you are wanting to get people emotionally engaged, start with line managers. Because recent research has shown that mediocre line managers are the real problem in organisations because they fly under the radar. We know who are the poor ones. We know who are the top flyers. But it's the ones in the middle. Start with line manager relationships. That's vital in ensuring you get emotional commitment in your teams. And it's important to know also that it's been shown that organisational structures can really undermine emotional engagement. Are your structures supporting emotional engagement, or are they undermining it? And leadership can be the main cause of loss of trust. It can undermine trust. So, things to think about. But to just kind of end up, I just want to sort of finish off really by talking a little bit about my own story into the world of emotional engagement. And it doesn't end actually in 2002 when I wrote my book, because in 2004 I had a head injury and I was unable to work for 2 years. That was tough. I wasn't able to go and take my daughter to her first day at school. That was tougher. I lost a lot of my speech and my gestures, my short-term memory, and my ability to cope with sensory stimulation, like, for example, going shopping. Of all things, darn. But actually, just going in the supermarket was a mind killer. So I wasn't able to continue my high life of global travel, unfortunately. So what I did was I gained a local contract. And the chap that I contracted with had values and ethics that I completely aligned to. And I discovered from being this slightly vegetative person who could barely walk down to get a cup of tea, suddenly I had boundless energy. And I could do all the stuff that I loved doing, interestingly. And I had a purpose here that I believed in. And I was able to perform at exceptional levels cognitively. A complete surprise to my neuropsychologist, who had been previously testing me, and I couldn't do very basic things. It made a huge difference. This should be a really happy ending, but it's not. It became very apparent that there was some serious wrongdoing that others were involved in. And to talk about Kim Holt, I don't know if any of you have heard of Kim Holt. She was the whistleblower in the Baby P case, that tragic case, you may know about it. And she's now the leader of the wellbeing charity Patients First. Whistleblowers, not wellbeing. Maybe the two go together. And she shared this with me. She said, no one can even imagine the bullying of whistleblowers unless they've experienced it themselves. And I agree. After the bullying comes the anxiety, deep dark moods, and a complete sense of disengagement, not just in work, but in life. So what did I do? I reinvented my business. I decided I was going to structure for emotional engagement. So I did. I structured for flow and happiness. I got into my bliss and I started to do what really mattered. What really mattered to me. I got back to basics. Self-confidence, self-esteem. I acknowledged my emotions, other people's emotions, and the effect my emotions were having on other people, as well as theirs on me. And I'll tell you what, you can judge for yourself if you think, I have the energy, the vigour, the dedication and the passion. That's how you can judge that. And the cognition comes to that. In these days of triple dip recession, debt, corporate scandals and so-called people of standing preying on the vulnerable and getting away with murder, or at least abuse, with an upsurge in attitudes, in entitlement, not only from employees, actually, but from business leaders, and so much stock being placed in money. You know, bonuses being the measure of worth, but not always the measure of competence and talent. Knowing that only 1 to 3% of people in the population are naturally everyday heroes, and that they will stand up to wrongdoing, and that another 1% are probably psychopaths. In these days when strong ethics and values are paramount, emotional engagement has never been more important. Emotional engagement is not only the cure to all your business ills and the answer to improve profit. Emotional engagement saves people. And emotionally engaged people save lives. Just an end note. How do you engender compassion, honesty, passion and respect in the workplace? Well, emotional engagement will do that with emotionally engaged people you get. But if you're going to have that, you have to come in with a positive attitude to vulnerability. Why? Because compassion responds to it, honesty requires it, and passion exposes it. So, this is what is required for you to begin engendering emotional engagement at work. Your courage, you have to step into your own vulnerability on this. You know, we're talking emotions here. Your trust in your people as well as yourself, in all your people, and your universal acceptance of vulnerability in everyone. Vulnerability is a few years ago, I used to say love was the only four-letter word you couldn't hear in the boardroom. Actually, vulnerability is the thing that people don't want to talk about at the moment. And without getting into that, without vulnerability, we can't have, to quote Brené Brown, innovation, change and creativity. We have to. So, to end up, I just want you to remember my little story of me with my 3 little friends. And remember that we all have within us that childlike ability to be completely emotionally engaged in what we do. That we have the ability to find the fun and the purpose in absolutely anything and put our heart and soul into it. And if we remember that emotions connect us, then let's get out there and, as Nita said, shake hands with somebody next to you. Step into your vulnerability, okay, and let's make some good connections. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Thank you.